Hello, Bert. We're here today in this beautiful oval museum room in the Teylers in Haarlem. Could you tell us a little about the history of this museum?
Yes, the so-called Oval Room was built in 1780, and the museum nowadays is called after Pieter Teyler van der Hulst. He was a very wealthy man. He had a kind of factory for textile in Haarlem. And after his death in 1778, he decided in his last will that all his money was for a museum, a public museum. And he also founded two learned societies to promote art and science. And nowadays we still have in this museum a beautiful collection of art and science. Pieter Teyler van der Hulst was a typical man of his time, the time of the Enlightenment, and the Enlightenment is the period to not only to collect but also to visit public collections and to see demonstrations and art shows, and that people could talk about all the new developments in art and science. And these collections are not the collections of Pieter Teyler van der Hulst. When he died, he had a beautiful collection of coins and medals, some paintings, drawings, and stuffed birds. But it was not a scientific collection. And his friends decided to start a museum with beautiful instruments, very new for the Dutch people. And when you see the collections, we don't have old instruments. We don't have microscopes of Pieter van Leeuwenhoek. For he was in the time of Teyler, he was still 100 years dead. So when they started in 1780 in this room, all was very, very new. Not the paintings and the drawings. When they collected the beautiful drawings, they were very fond to find a beautiful collection in Rome of the drawings of Christine of Sweden. So we have a beautiful collection nowadays with Michelangelo's, Guercino, Claude Lorrain, Rembrandt, and that's a beautiful collection. And all artists far before the time of Pieter Teyler van der Hulst.
Now, I noticed in the other room, as I was passing into this oval room, that it has the appearance of what I would think from fiction of Frankenstein's laboratory. It seems it's filled with instruments that I can't even identify. Could you tell us a little about the instruments that we have there?
Yeah, it's nice to know that all the directors and curators of the cabinets of all the collections, they were scientists. And they were not only collectors in this museum. So Martinus van Marem, the first director of the museum, he was a geologist. He knew a lot of chemistry, biology, all parts of physics. And he started in 1780 to build an enormous electrostatic generator. And like a student in Groningen, he had a very small instrument, but Teyler was very, very rich, and there was an amount of money to build the most beautiful instruments. And he liked to see the enormous sparks of an electrostatic generator, but not a small one. So he could build here an enormous machine. And that was in a time they had no electric light, there were no lamps, so he couldn't use the electricity of the instruments, and it was only to do a lot of proofs with electricity and magnetism and chemistry and so on. And after all his proofs in the museum, they stopped for we had another kind of electricity and an invention of Mr. Volta. So Van Marem stopped, but it's a beautiful machine, and perhaps it works still nowadays, but it's too too precious, yes, to touch. Yeah.
I notice there's also some musical instruments of some unidentifiable nature or origin.
Yes, all the curators had a laboratory here in the museum. And so Professor Lawrence, one of the first Nobel Prize winners, worked in the museum here, but also Professor Lawrence. And in the Second World War, he had not so much to do, and he was fond of the ideas of Huygens with his series of music. And in the Second World War, he built an organ in the 31-tone system. And till nowadays, we have the organ upstairs, and sometimes on a Sunday, a concert. Yeah.
Now, there are a lot of fossils from prehistoric times. Could you describe some of those for us?
Yes, the paleontological collection is also world famous. For Van Marum and his colleagues started collecting in a time that people knew nothing about evolution. And we have an enormous, the Mosasaurus. It is a saurier from the south in the Netherlands, from the Cretaceous period. It's about 80 million years ago. And in the time of Van Marum, they thought it was an enormous crocodile. But some years after that they dig up the enormous fossil, they saw that it was not a crocodile, but a saurier. We have the Homo delivutestis. It's also a very famous fossil, and they thought it was a very small baby who was not in the Arch of Noah, and it was slipped in the clay and became a fossil. So there are a lot of famous fossils in the museum far before all the ideas about evolution. And most of the famous fossils are published far before the museum was opened. But Van Marum, he traveled through Europe and bought all the famous stuff for this museum. Also the top of the Mont Blanc is here. That was a very famous expedition at the end of the 18th century. And not to climb to the top for skiing, but to do research. And so Van Marum bought the complete expedition for this museum.
Now, I see that oftentimes we look at science today as being this kind of a group of people in white smocks moving around a sterilized laboratory. But in those days, science was a little bit different, wasn't it?
Yes, for in this museum, it was not only a museum to collect, but to show and to demonstrate all the instruments. People were invited to come in the museum and see the research. And you could buy a ticket and come to the enormous electrostatic generator. And you can also understand the instruments, for they are open. It's not a white box with a lot of electronic in it, but it's nice to see and to understand. And it was the time of the Enlightenment, so it was also for the scientists a reason to invite people and to talk with the people about their research. And now it's only for universities and other places for yeah.
So it was like a kind of a commingling of the common man with the scientists, which we rarely get in this day and age. Huh? I see that oftentimes Holland is an overlooked small country, but in fact in the 18th century it was considered one of the enlightened, progressive countries in the world, wasn't it?
Yes, and we see it still nowadays. We have a lot of scientists from all over the world. They like not only to visit but to study the collections. In the beginning of this museum, we had a lot of money to buy all the beautiful things about fossils and drawings and so on. And there are a lot of countries like Germany, and they like to study their fossils here. And this is, in this oval room, we have about 500 scientific instruments, all collected and built in this museum of the end of the 18th century. And that's unique. Yeah. So it's not only important for Holland, for the Dutch people, but all the collections, also the drawings and the coins and medals, it's an international collection. Yes. And we are very proud of it.
Now, this was a very early museum in Holland, wasn't it?
Yeah. It's the first public museum in the Netherlands. And after the Enlightenment, at the beginning of the 19th century, all the museums became specialized. In the 1830s, we have the Museum of Natural History in Leiden. We have the Rijksmuseum with all the paintings and drawings. And nowadays we have, I think in Holland, about 700 museums, all specialized from stones and paintings and coins and medals, but Teylers Museum is unique art and science still nowadays together.
Now, speaking of art, you have quite a nice collection of paintings too. When did that come about?
We were the first museum in the Netherlands who started collecting paintings of modern artists. And we started the collecting in 1830, but we have no room to place all the paintings on the wall. So we had two new buildings in the 19th century to see the paintings of the 19th century. And we have a beautiful collection of The Hague and the Romantic School with paintings of Koekoek and Schelfhout and Kruseman, Weissenbruch, but also later Breitner, Israels, and so on. Yeah.
We were talking earlier about one of your exhibitions on death, which I thought was a really terrific exhibition. You have, from time to time, special exhibits here, don't you? And is something coming up here soon?
Yes, we are very glad. We have a new exhibition wing built in 1996, and we use the new wing for temporary exhibitions. And nowadays we have a beautiful collection of drawings of Max Beckmann from Germany.
Now, when the people want to come and visit your museum, when is it open and what are your hours?
We are closed only 2 days a year. That's on the first Christmas Day and New Year's Day. And Monday, but the other days we are open from 10 till 17, and Sunday from 12 o'clock till 17 o'clock.
Bert, thank you very much for telling us about the Teylers Museum. It's a splendid place.